There's people that exist. Hi, people. It's me in person.
Kathy, welcome to the Femsplainers. It's so great to have you, and also, as you say, it's just great to interact with people.
Are you guys algorithms? Just tell me.
No.
Did Molly say, that's Molly's hologram, you guys.
Nobody would make an algorithm like
Nobody would have holograms with roofs like this.
Nobody would have
holograms. How does this work? When do I shut up and when do I talk?
Kathy, the Darwin is obsessed with you.
Look, I have been telepathically sending him messages. He is already working diligently for he's actually tracking down Stacey Abrams and Elizabeth Warren at the same time to see who really wants to be the vice, the real president.
He told me.
I tasked him with that one simple thing.
We left her house and he goes, Mom, Kathy's house is really nice. And he goes, Kathy's husband he goes, he's really handsome.
Yeah, he's handsome. And also, my house is the fanciest house he's ever seen in his life. And a lot of rich people. Hi, girls.
He was so
who owned the house before you bought it?
Oh, this is the best part. They actually made a documentary about it on Netflix called Sour Grapes, and it was in an episode of American Greed. So the guy who built this house, who never lived in it, is in jail now. He's the biggest wine frauder in history.
Oh, yeah.
He's a guy named Rudy, and he and his mother, and I can't help it, I kind of like the mom. She really like the moo, and they scammed all these like sommeliers and James Beard Award winners and stuff. And he finally went to prison, and they made a film about how these like super high and mighty sommeliers from the biggest restaurants around the world, and this was going to be his like wine crime house. And so the funny thing is, I've never had a drink in my life, and I have more professional wine storage. I have a wine cellar that's for 1,000 bottles. Then he hid other like up to regulation wine. I have like 4 wine refrigerators that aren't even the wine cellar, which is bigger than my first apartment.
Wait, what is a wine crime? Like,
you sell,
honey, you do not mess with, it's like the truffle world. Like, you do not mess with like fake super fancy wine. And I, being the child of an alcoholic, it was Franzia across the board and 2 buck chuck. But apparently in the real wine world, those people get very upset when some guy named Rudy siphons a label off an expensive bottle, gives it to his mom. She goes into the bathroom in Bell, California, comes out with some new wine, and they're paying like $5,000 a bottle. So he's on he's also on a staycation. But he's isolated.
You don't still live next to the Kardashians, right? Or did you move from the Kardashians?
That's a little hard for me because I feel abandoned by Kanye. Kim and I still text, but
you shared a backyard, or almost. You had a wall.
Oh no, Molly was here. Like it was, I could you could see that in my arm. Like that's almost how close the house is now. It was hysterical. So yes, within arm's reach of the Kardashians, it was literal for me.
It's true.
What about the royals? Are they anywhere near you? And are you?
No, can I tell you something? By the way, is this official, or are we just shooting?
Can we start recording?
Recording.
Oh, good. All right, I won't cuss, but I don't know the rules.
No, you can cuss.
It's fine.
Okay, well, I think, my humble opinion, being a shallow Hollywood person and literally living in Bel Air, that's how shallow I've gotten. It's very, Molly can't even look at me. Look at her.
I like it.
Are you texting Paul Krugman?
Oh my God, poor Paul Krugman.
Wait, do the girls not know about our crushes?
We love Paul Krugman.
He's cute, but I want to hear about the royals.
You don't want to hear about our 3-way with David Gergen?
Hey, can I just say, my husband David is related to Paul Krugman. David's related to Paul Krugman.
Really?
Oh God, a Canadian? He's a Canadian?
No, there's some cousin, there's some crossover. His grandparents went to Canada. Paul Krugman's parents went to New York, and they're cousins. There's some sort of cousin level.
Well, he has, what prize does he have, Molly? Like Pulitzer or Nobel or whatever?
Yeah, does he have a Nobel?
No, I think, I don't know. I would guess Pulitzer.
Pulitzer Prize.
Yawn. Anyway, he's got 1 Pulitzer. And when I met him at Molly's apartment, he said, and by the way, I told him to his face that he's on the scale. And I said, do you know you're on the scale? And he went, yes. And I went, come on, Kruggy. And then finally he giggled a little bit. But I believe his line was, I haven't been to the East Side in 17 years, or like something like so New Yorky that I was like, did you take an airplane? Oh my gosh. So you should know that Molly and I secretly have, like I would say you and I share in common, we have friends that people wouldn't think we're friends with.
True.
A little bit.
Right.
In a good way.
Odd crushes. Like everybody is now in love with Chris Cuomo. Like everybody. I know.
Don't get me started because I now live for that show. I'm not even kidding. So that show, I actually posted something today, and we've been struggling obviously as a nation and in my narrow profession, but how do you deal with comedy with all this? I mean, I personally am truly scared shitless. I am not one of these, let's have a baseball game tomorrow. I started, I took a screenshot of when I started following this on the Johns Hopkins map on January 28th. So, we've all known a pandemic was someday going to come. So I'm not sure why people are acting like it isn't what it is. So I'm of the school of, we just don't know anything yet. And so I actually am frankly, I'm very interested in watching the Cuomo show, but I have to say the dark twisted side of myself, and I did post a clip of this today, I fall for it. I love the bit with he and his brother. Yeah. I love the idea that he's ill from a serious illness and the brother still like hits him because I think in this era of what is okay to laugh about regarding COVID and what isn't, that was the first thing that I was like, okay, I'm going to post this. And of course I got half hate comments anyway, but I think that because you can tell that relationship is real and they've been giving each other crap since they were, 2 years old or whatever. Yeah. I thought that's it. That's something that it's okay to laugh at the end, whenever they have their segment. But no, I'm obsessed with the family. Like I know the wife's name now and I know the kids' names.
Oh, I wrote to Christina.
What's going on?
Because she has COVID.
I know, but did you hear? Okay, is this truth or rumor that he got into a verbal altercation with someone on Sunday on the front lawn?
No, he got into a verbal altercation with
a bicyclist, right?
I think the cyclist was on a fat tire bike, but the way he described it, it came out like he was calling the biker fat. And the biker came up to him and said something about social distancing because he was out with his wife and things. And he said he got really mad and told the guy
my favorite.
And said, I only have to put up with this because I'm a celebrity. And then the biker went to the police station.
By the way, are there any secondaries and tertiaries on the story?
No, the biker told his side, and he said basically that I just said something and Chris Cuomo went ballistic. He does seem to have a bit of a temper, Chris Cuomo.
I love it. I'm also, go ahead, Mal.
Are they in the Hamptons?
Yes.
Well, that's what I'm fascinated by. First of all,
not going to go anywhere.
But when they describe, by the way, I don't think there are secondaries and tertiaries to the story. So I did see the local ABC News report, and I do know the guy made a police report, the cyclist. But what I keep picturing Chris Cuomo and two women, and the way I read it was they were standing on his front lawn. So maybe they were social distancing, but I keep picturing this weird like triangle of grown-ups, and I didn't know, like, were they just wanting some fresh air, and were they in a cluster? Was that why the guy yelled? Were they not in a cluster? But I do love the idea, and I know this is terrible, but I love the idea that Christopher Cuomo is now, he's like the new Kathy Griffin. You don't know what he's going to say on CNN any minute. I love it, and I love when he's foggy. He talked about the trances and seeing the old man who I loved at the head of his bed, and the brother's dressed as a ballerina. I live for that.
I loved it.
And the brother rolls with it, and he's like, he probably is calling the White House once an hour, as he should be.
Yeah.
So, all right, sorry. I got off track. Yes, I'm calling the Cuomos.
What's it like in Hollywood? Because we've all been amused
by the Imagine video.
Oh, okay. Okay, so Hollywood is if anyone is a friend of Bill W's, it turns out denial is a river in Egypt. It turns out the big book is wrong. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to get in trouble for this. I personally feel like Hollywood is not quite there yet. The Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 7 stages of death. Yeah. I would say they're still in denial. And I admire their optimism. But I have heard rumblings from many, many friends in the industry that are seasoned professionals with like, we might have to promote the season. We might have to put off the season like 2 weeks now. Right? And I'm like, I don't think schools are opening till 2021, but So honestly, nobody knows what's happening. But to tell you the truth, at this moment, and it could change, it's kind of weird that people are acting like everything's normal.
Do you think, or you get this impression from Instagram that like celebrities are like trying to look like they're doing the right thing, but maybe it's also they just are like desperate for attention they're not getting.
Yeah, it's awful. I mean, let's cut the shit. It's so annoying. I think there's so much that we still have to learn, and because so many, unfortunately, as many people have been touched by COVID, not enough people have really seen enough of it to know like when it's sort of appropriate to do that stuff. And by the way, look who you're talking to. But what I mean is, for example, I wrote a thread about it yesterday, but my husband has one of his best friends, and he's a 40-year-old guy, and he's been on a ventilator for 2 weeks in a hospital in Florida. They had to have him, face down on the bed. They finally extubated him yesterday, and he panicked and he couldn't breathe, and they had to re-ventilate him. 40-year-old guy. So we kind of feel like we're living that because Randy's on like a text chain, and we both kind of wake up if the phone goes off. And, I went to the hospital, and I don't think I could have survived without the hospital treatment that I got. And yet I didn't read, there were 3 testing requirements that the CDC didn't let me have. And yet when I was there, because the minute they looked at me, they put me right in the ER COVID isolation ward. So there's an ER isolation ward. I sent Molly a picture. There's like a room with like a like that. And then if you go full time, you go upstairs. And I think you then mandatorily have to be there 14 to 21 days. So what was interesting, and the reason I talked to the Los Angeles Times about it when it happened, is I want people to know, I wasn't trying to make a point that like even celebrities can't get a test. I was just making the point that when I even had a doctor say, you do have to, it's now time for you to go. First I went to urgent care. I was like, okay, this is maybe no big deal. But then when
sorry, Kathy, you had like stomach issues. You'd come back from Mexico.
Yeah, I don't know if, of course I don't want to blame anything that happened in Mexico, but because I had traveled out of the country, a coterie of reasons, but mostly based on my symptoms. Severe, the body aches, the cramping pains felt like, fire. The vomiting was so intense, there was nothing left to vomit, but it was like my throat was spasming in an involuntary way. And
I had that.
Yeah, so I was like dehydrated, shivering. So the point is I had enough traits where the main doctor, and 2 of the nurses said, and they kept looking at the screen, and they kept going like this, like, the CDC, there's just 3 boxes we can't check. And it was really, I really felt like, but first, initially they said it. They said, well, let's test you right away. And then the guy even said, well, if your husband went to Mexico with you, why don't we at least give him a test now? We'll take you in. And he had to go home, of course. And then once we got in the room, I felt like they were really wanting to, it's a hospital. They want to test you and see what's going on. And then they specifically said the CDC guidelines, they're so restrictive. They can only give you a test when you're almost like my husband's friend, who's, he pretty much almost couldn't breathe.
Is he gonna be okay?
You know how it is. He's been in ICU for 3 weeks, on the vent for 2 weeks, tried to take it off.
That's not good.
Extubated him, then re-intubated him today. We're very scared. And so what I'm learning, and I kind of wanted to ask you ladies in your experience, I'm kind of learning that there's kind of 2 sets of my pals. There's someone who is really personally being touched by it. Molly is one of them, meaning she's expressing like, what do you mean you're going to open up the country? Here's a million pieces of data to show why. And then I find that in my own experience, there's kind of a whole separate other set of whatever folks I run across or talk to or virtually whatever, that if they haven't been affected by it yet, they tend to kind of, at this point, it could be different a week from now, 2 days from now, I would say that people in LA are still kind of acting like it's not happening for the most part.
Well, you don't have
in
it.
New York, it may have peaked because some of the most dire predictions never came true. They didn't have to fill the Javits Center.
But in New York, the thing about, even though the most dire, like those crazy predictions where you're going to need 80,000 ventilators or something, they didn't come true. But you do have, like, I talked to a friend of mine who's a doctor last night, and she was saying it's much better we don't have the bed checks where we find the dead people in the beds. Like what we're looking like, it's much better, but it's still so bad here.
Well,
like,
so here's my question for the group,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I'm totally ruining my role, and I apologize. I'm being a bad guest, but I think that there's something just odd, and yet I'm afraid to even say it on Twitter because I'll get in trouble. But I'm 59 years old. I can never remember a time where, you know, the government, my own personal physician, hospitals, you know, we hear it on the news, we're reading the news every day, saying to Americans, every single one of them, you have to be this sick before you even think about coming to an ER.
Right.
I mean, it's always been the opposite. If you get people earlier on in their sickness, you're going to have a lot less people in the ER, et cetera. So
Right.
I'm wondering, what do you guys think it'll take for hospitals to be able to say to people, hey, if you guys can come in sooner, we're going to be able to save a lot more of you.
well, the problem, I think the fundamental problem, I think the fundamental problem is they don't know how to treat this. So what they,
Like the medical staff?
right. I mean, there aren't a lot of, you know, there's not a proven therapeutic. Everything is experimental. So they can't even give it to you until you're so sick that there are no other choices.
Yeah.
So if you get a person who might end up having a mild case in there and you try to give them something that could cause heart murmurs or heart attack, you are legally like in so much trouble. So I think that's why they just don't want you to come in unless, and also because everything's so overwhelmed.
Well, also, Kathy, to your point, what makes this crazy is that it's been mostly spread by people who don't show symptoms.
Right.
Right. So we all feel guilty and fearful at the same time. I don't want to give it to anybody, you know.
Kathy, do you go out of your house at all?
No, I haven't been out of the house since the hospital, which was March 23rd.
Do you have people that come into the house?
No,
No.
it's been, we have myself, my husband, and we have a housemate. And so we've made sort of our own little isolation house, but that was kind of the deal. Nobody leaves.
You have to do your own house cleaning and everything.
Yep.
Oh my God.
I know. But basically, it's also until we know what's happening. Like,
right. And
the thing is, we are getting the flow of information is fast and furious.
Well, Kathy, let me ask you this. So one of the things that has happened right now, which I find really, really weird, and you talk about LA being in maybe its own bubble, not really taking it seriously, but now we're seeing it becoming cultural warfare, weaponized, that, like, as we've seen in Lansing, Michigan, and I think there were 2 other states. Like now people are, right, and South Dakota, where they're saying, it's like to show your support for Trump, you show disdain at social distancing, and that social distancing and isolation is some, abridgment of freedom and your rights. And so now we're having, on top of everything else, a culture war.
Yeah.
Over whether you should, and I'm kind of curious.
My feeling is, if you can shelter in place, and I know that I'm reeking of white privilege, and I understand. What I get mad is the people that really totally can shelter in place, but they're antsy. You know what I mean? So let's say that we're doing everything that we can for the community and the country, and we're all working together, and eventually maybe all the governors will work together, and eventually maybe somebody on the cabinet will do the right thing. But until then, I just kind of feel like those kind of events, like the ones that happened yesterday in Michigan, where it looked like The Walking Dead there, I believe it was the Capitol. I kind of feel like shelter in place, and whatever that is, I just want to, frankly, like, that's got to work itself out amongst people who feel that way. Like, I don't mean to be doing the others, but I hear what you're saying, and I see those images on television, and read about it as well. But frankly, that makes me think, and you want to open a baseball game where some of the people in the audience feel the way I do, but some of the people in the audience feel the way they do because it's baseball. And so that's one of those things, frankly, that makes me more anxious. Mm-hmm. And so I am disappointed that we don't have more electeds or officials in any capacity, or frankly, people with legitimacy, certainly not, I don't think celebrities would make the difference, but the more people that can say, like what I like is I watch Gavin Newsom's press conferences every day, and I watch Cuomo's, and I watch some other ones, but I really keep thinking of when 2 days ago when Newsom said this thing, he said in a very human way, he goes, give me a few more weeks. And so that's the one I keep playing in my head. Like, it's so simple. I know it's so fundamental, but it's just lives are on the freaking line. And like I said, going through this really just via Randy, his friend it's so dire and bad.
Yeah, you don't want to get it. You do not want to get it.
I mean, as bad as it gets. And so,
although it's possible that a lot of people get it are asymptomatic. So that's another mystery.
But Garcetti said no sports until 2021 now with Bloomberg.
And but they've been playing a little game. I know that there's the East cluster and the West cluster now. There's a Midwest cluster, but I have a feeling they're simpatico, and I have a feeling they're almost tag teaming the warnings. I call it I have a bomb to drop, but I've been watching it. So if Garcetti says we suggest you wear masks, then 24 hours from now he's going to say it's mandatory. So I think you're right. I think if Garcetti is the first one to even put it out there that there's no sports till 2021. He's getting people used to just the notion of that. And if you're someone like me who takes this very, very seriously, I find that comforting. We don't need sports to survive. They'll be there when this is over. They'll be there after a vaccine, so I'm nervous about other people. And I'm nervous about, I miss the days of, obviously, we were all around for the AIDS crisis, and we were so hungry for knowledge because our dear, dear friends were going in this vicious virus. So it reminds me a lot of that. I'm glad Dr. David Ho is working on it, who also worked on the AIDS vaccine. But remember, those first cocktails were really rough. So this notion that everyone's like, a vaccine could be 6 to 9 months. I'm like, no.
Yeah, I remember that in the AIDS crisis, there were these breakthroughs. We've got a cure. And then you would find that when they went through the controlled trials, it didn't work. So that's...
I've been watching a lot of apocalyptic series, including Chernobyl, which Molly and Christina know. And I just feel like, as you say, Kathy, like they're getting us ready for, okay, no sports till 2021. We're not leaving our houses till 2021.
I hope.
We can be like 2 weeks from now. We'll be different. But I don't see how it's going to be different 2 weeks from now.
A friend of mine made a great point, and he said, here's what I don't get about all this talk about how to open what and in what order. No information has changed since the day we did any mitigations. Right. So from the day that we did the first mitigations, let's say that, I'm going to guess, let's say that there were 2,500 cases in the country and somebody somewhere did a mild mitigation. From then until now, when we're talking about opening the country, nothing has changed. Right. There's not testing. The entire country, I believe, averages something really, really low. Like if you average out the number of tests per day and literally divide it by 50, it's 3,200. So imagine we're a country of 325 to 350 million people. Newsflash, you need 700 tests. Sorry. You need a test for everybody, and then you need that 4 weeks later one. Yeah. And then, the other antibody stuff, which now we're learning once again, day by day, like, oh, I thought this one might've been reliable. And then I saw another report where the person administering it only got negatives. So, it's changing so fast that if anything, that's what gives me anxiety. Like the virus is the virus, and it's brutal, and we don't know what it's going to be. But we kind of know there's this long thing that's really almost mythic in proportions. And we have always heard about pandemics. I mean, who are we kidding? Like we've always seen movies about it, read books about it, and history books. So this idea that we have no sources to turn to for how to behave. But more importantly, the idea that we have the actual examples of the other countries with free press or close to a free press, and we're not even following like their advice to a degree. That's what makes me uneasy. What about you guys?
How has it been for you? You must have had all sorts of things canceled. You have a calendar where you're booked every day and just gone. Were you like, I have less of a calendar, but I was relieved not to have to do all those things. I'm sort of personally happy to be at home and
You and Larry David.
Yeah.
I think Larry could be in isolation for 40 years and be very happy.
I think, how has it been for you psychologically? someone who's sort of out there and, you know, a star. Now you're stranded at home. Is it?
Well, I will say, I mean, sort of, if you're going to think about the bigger picture of all of this, you know, I kind of have two ways of thinking this could go, and it's not going to be two ways. It could go anyway. But if we go the dystopian route, which is more likely, because as you know, this is the beginning of a typical authoritarian transition, et cetera, et cetera. Or I have the fantasy, which is the utopian vision, which is somehow at the end of this, it actually is the great leveler and it is the great humbler. And at the end of this, we are more, you know, we're less polluted because we had to force down things, but it gets us to, I mean, Molly knows this, I'm a big fan of old-fashioned Dorothy Parker style dinner parties, and I demand phones down because real live conversation.
Best dinner parties ever.
You know what, at the last one I had, 3 journalists, I caught them all running into the bathroom at one time because somebody let a scoop out.
Really? Yeah. From the party?
Yeah, somebody from the party had, like, I think it was like Maria Shriver, somebody let something like leak and it was really juicy. So like one by one, like I think it was Jim Laporta, like 3 journos, like Leopold, you know how he is.
Oh, I love him.
Well, you know, he's getting the scoop. So
as soon as life gets back to normal, the first trip, because my brother is having a baby, so as soon as in LA, so that's going to be my first trip is coming to.
All right, this is the worst question for, you know, I consider myself Jewish adjacent because Irish Catholic and Jewish are pretty.
I can't believe you're not Jewish. That's the big mystery.
What?
You just, I see like a young Joan Rivers.
Oh, I got her painting right up there. This is my office. I call her the boss. Every day I come to my office and I say hi to the boss.
You are her rightful daughter.
Oh, I loved her. I think about her every day. I think about the fact that at this moment, Joan really would be the only person that could get away with certain things. And I do think that. And I do hear that from a lot of people. Like, there isn't a Joan or Rickles at this moment. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there will be a time when we have that spectrum again. From
that could be you. That could be you, Kathy. It could be you.
Hey, it's my honor. My honor. I can't wait to get back on the road or do specials or, you know, do anything.
No, I listen to a lot of comedians, but for a long time I followed you, and you have that spark, and also just that you just can't help but say the wrong thing sometimes.
I know.
It's irresistibly great. Now tell us a little bit about, we won't go into it because, well, it's not as depressing as the pandemic, but in its way, you had this cataclysmic event where you were canceled, you made a joke, it went wrong, you apologized, but it wasn't enough. You had to be not just excoriated, eliminated. I mean, you were.
Well, actually, Donald Trump Jr.'s word is decimated. Our family wants to decimate Kathy Griffin, not just put her out of work.
Which also means he doesn't know what decimate means.
Oh, it's a lot of letters. No, he's pro-Mac. He's not even fully formed. I don't want to even insult Jane Goodall, but anyway, yeah. I mean, in a way, I know it sounds hyperbolic, but I kind of feel like I lost 2 old lives. Like the Trump photo made me sort of lose my old life in a way that way. And then obviously the pandemic, we all feel like, I don't know, have you guys started having the like, what do you miss about your old life conversations?
Yeah.
Okay, I got to hear them.
I miss my clothes. I miss wearing, you know, clothes.
Right.
I miss shopping.
Is it the tactile part? Like, is it like, oh, I miss hugging friends? Is it the leaving the house? Like, what do you?
No, it's this whole sense of, you know, if you're putting on something other than your sweat clothes, you have plans.
Right. Or you're out of your mind. You know, like I couldn't walk around I might be walking around in a ball gown in a week. I might just.
I mean, we could be like the British, you know, in the jungle, and every night they'll put on dinner jackets.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's something to that you just don't let civilization go.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
It is hard, and we don't know it yet. And by the way, the whole celebrity thing, honestly, I love making fun of celebrities, but celebrities are humans and they vote. And I think, like, I'm not up on all this stuff because I'm a little more of a newsy person than a celebrity person these days, but I'm still both. But I think it's super cool. Like when Bocelli did that first video where he was on his balcony, like not even the big production one, but just him on his balcony, but just like, that was really cool. You know, I think some, Chris Evans or somebody, like it was some big hot guy, action stars, like reading children's books or something like like John Legend singing, like I think that stuff is all great. I do get what you're saying though. I guess what I struggle with, only because like I said, I don't think enough people have been touched by it that will be, is sometimes it's a little hard to switch between, this is just me personally, like the world where, you know, I'm watching Randy read one of his texts about his friend and I'm watching his face, and then I'm seeing like a video of somebody like dancing around, and I'm trying to reconcile that right now too, because I think people should go on Instagram and dance if they're fine, but we have to figure out a way to integrate all this stuff, you know, and maybe something after all this is done is maybe somehow we do get more human. Although we're going to be tracked. Let me tell you right now, we're going to be tracked.
Well,